everyone. I'm Jody from Real Progress in Action. I'm excited to have two guests who are making a documentary about the Venezuelan Embassy protectors. They were actually there on the ground during the fight to defend the embassy. So we have so much to talk about today. So let me just start by introducing them. We have Al R. Suarez. He is a water and embassy protector, an author, an activist, and a journalist. He hosts Vanguard Youth Radio and is a contributing writer for Popular Resistance. Hi, Al. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
David Tornheim has been a progressive activist for 20 years. He got his start doing grassroots organizing in San Francisco and has worked on local initiatives like blocking corporate chain stores and cell towers. He has also worked on progressive electoral campaigns and ballot issues and is a veteran Wikipedia editor. Welcome, David.
Thank you for letting us on.
David and Al are co-directing a documentary about the embassy protectors, and they are associated with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign based in Philadelphia and led by Sherry Hunkala, and the People's Power Assembly out of Baltimore, led by Sharon Black. Well, I think we need to start this conversation by talking about Venezuela itself, right? There's so much misinformation in the mainstream media. Even people on the left are confused about what's going on there. So could we kind of start with getting a broad overview? First of all, let's talk about why do we refer to this as the Bolivian Revolution?
Well, actually, there's a difference between Bolivia and Bolivarian, and I'm glad that you brought that up because it's important for activists to understand that. Bolivian is a nationality for the country of Bolivia, and Bolivarian are people who follow the ideology of Simón Bolívar. Bolivar was a figure in the early 1800s who liberated several South American and even a Central American nation from the Spanish Empire. And he was of Venezuelan nationality. And so he was a very important figure to people like Hugo Chavez, a very important figure to the current president of Venezuela, the legitimate elected president, Nicolás Maduro. So Bolivar is very important. And the country of Bolivia was named after Bolivar. That's why people get those two things mixed up. But several countries that Bolivar liberated, such as Peru, where my father's from, the liberator of Peru in the Peruvian Constitution was Bolivar, Ecuador, Panama, Colombia, the list goes on and on. He liberated those countries, and therefore his legacy is in anti-imperialism. And what is the empire of today? What is the empire that the Latin American people perceive today? That's the US empire. So the obstacles that Chavez, who was obsessed with history, faced in his nation, he saw parallels always with his hero, Bolivar. And he had many heroes, but Bolivar was the principal one. Now, Chavez was elected to office in 1998, assumed power in 1999. There was a transition or transformation. There wasn't just a transition of power to a more revolutionary leader. There was a transformation in the thinking, in the consciousness of the people. So I moved to South America in 2002. I was 17 at the time, and I always took an interest in politics. And I could see for myself how the older generation, like my father's generation, who were very proud, because most Latin people are mestizo, right? Like they don't even still have mestizo as race on the census. They just say Hispanic, non-white. But if you're in the US Census, but if you're mestizo, as a majority of Latin American people are, that means you have both indigenous and Spanish roots. There are also Venezuelans and Brazilians and others that have Afro roots, and Chavez was very proud of his Afro roots as well. But prior to 1999, the predominant thinking was still the old thinking that, oh, I'm part Spanish, I'm more proud of my Spanish roots. And so what changed? You had in 2006, the first indigenous president in the hemisphere elected, Evo Morales in Bolivia, who was a very strong ally openly of Hugo Chavez, Fidel Castro, etc. So that's the country where Che Guevara, a very important revolutionary from Argentina who took part in the Cuban Revolution, had been killed by Rangers trained by the CIA. So you see now parallels to the Bolivian coup that happened a few months ago against Evo Morales. And I see David just put on his Evo Morales hat that the Bolivian comrades gifted us.
Yeah, here's the Evo Morales hat.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so after Chavez was elected in 1998, it's very important for people to understand. From 1998 to 2002, he called himself a progressive nationalist, right? Much like Bolivar was. When did he start to embrace socialism? He started to advocate and openly embrace socialism after the CIA-backed coup attempt in 2002. It's very important to understand this, okay? This was in the Bush years, just prior to the Iraq War, okay? And so this is how close they were to killing him. The CIA sent in their Venezuelan ultra-right group, the white upper echelons of Venezuelan society. They backed this coup. And what happened? They kidnapped Chavez and they sent him to an island. They weren't going to kill him in Caracas, in the Venezuelan capital. They sent him to an island in the Caribbean off the coast of Venezuela. They had the guns ready, and Chavez was prepared to be executed. He was a very brave man. And what happened? All of a sudden, Chavez, who was a veteran himself, what was the name of the brigade? The helicopter brigade arrived on the island and saved him. That was his brigade. He was a commander of that brigade. And not only that, 1 million people showed up to the presidential palace in Miraflores in Caracas, Venezuela. 1 million people showed up and demanded he return. And they were going to break through the gates and lynch the puppet government that was in power. And so that prompted the military, who were just about to execute Chavez on Washington's orders, to back off. Because the U.S. saw Chavez as a threat because they knew he was going to use the oil wealth to help his people, to help other Latin nations, to help Cuba. That's exactly what he did when he returned to power triumphant on his helicopter. Then he started advocating for socialism. This is a very dramatic thing that people need to see. People need to go and they need to see documentaries, like from people like Michael Moore, Sicko, where he goes to Cuba and see the system there. I've been to Cuba. I was there in 2017. People need to see documentaries like from Oliver Stone, who actually knows our executive producer. Oliver Stone made a spectacular documentary in 2009. Everybody should go on it. It's on Prime. It's on different outlets. And it's called South of the Border. And in south of the border, he goes to Cuba, Venezuela, Argentina, all these countries. At the time, they call it the pink tide. All these Latin left progressive governments started rising up, uniting with Venezuela against U.S. empire. It was historical times. And that's coming back. Argentina just had a left victory. But you see, Oliver Stone goes, he's very respected, and he speaks with the heads of state. He speaks with the people involved in these movements. And it's a side of things that Americans don't see. They still don't want you to see films like South of the Border. What our film is trying to do is not just encompass what happened at the Venezuelan embassy, but tell you a little bit about the recent history of Bolivar, of Chavez, of Maduro, and talk to you about the importance of unity and the Bolivarian Revolution, not just in Venezuela, but in other Latin countries like in Peru and Argentina, etc. The moral force of socialism of the 21st century is very strong and very threatening to the U.S. establishment. And that is why they've gone to great lengths to try to defame Maduro and now have this bounty on his head, which we can get into later. But you started off by asking about Bolivar. I just want to show you something right here.
Bolivia, because you have that snazzy little flag behind you, right?
This flag here, just like our co-director David had showed his Evo Morales hat that they gave us, we had Peruvian and Bolivian comrades that we visited in Maryland back in January. We went to D.C., who gave us gifts. And one of the things they gifted to us was this beautiful flag from Bolivia, which is called La Wimpala. So the Wimpala flag represents the indigenous nations of Bolivia. This is the legacy of Evo Morales, who suffered a coup. And his ally is going to be running for office in this coming May. Hopefully the virus won't complicate things down there. But right now, the fascists that took over, the US-backed fascists in Bolivia, are burning these flags. So the diaspora of Bolivians and socialists, internationalists like myself that are going around, to the protests, this flag is also a moral force for us.
Now, why is the U.S. so threatened by Venezuela? I mean, what, I know that it has to do with oil and other resources and whatnot. Could you explain a little bit about that? What is so threatening to the U.S.?
As a Chavista or a follower of the ideas of Chavez, or as a socialist, to me, you have to put things in perspective, right? So when I see these things like the $15 million bounty against Maduro, even though the US's own statistic says that the drug trade, only 7% of it goes through Venezuela. I would say probably none of it goes through Venezuela, but their own statistics say 93% Colombia, who's the United States' best friend, and 7% Venezuela. So why not go after Colombia? Because they have U.S. bases there, and they have a U.S. puppet regime there who's very hostile to Venezuela. And so this $15 million bounty in the midst of a virus while the United States is maintaining an embargo against Cuba and Venezuela is a means to try to have a stranglehold over Venezuela's oil and to try to dampen its example and prevent the domino effect so that other governments in Latin America follow Chavez and Maduro's example. And in case people don't understand the chronology, in 2013, Chavez died from a rare form of cancer. And in 2014, the year after Maduro was elected, because they're very democratic, they have international observers in Venezuela. So unlike here, the president dies like Johnson took over from Kennedy. Did anybody elect Johnson? Kennedy died and Johnson, they don't do that in Venezuela. Maduro was elected. There was people that ran against him. And so when he was elected in 2013 after the death of Chavez, by 2014, the United States and the Saudis made a deal to lower oil prices. They knew how much Venezuela counted on their oil. And this did not just have implications for Venezuela, it had implications for Cuba, who was a very important ally of Venezuela, they still are. It had implications for Russia. So that was out of Maduro's control. There was a crisis that fomented from that, from the sanctions, which made things worse, and from the lowering of oil prices. But no matter who the president was at that point, even if it was an angel, there would be economic implications. So there was chaos because Chavez died, and Maduro's a great leader, but he doesn't have the charisma of Chavez. Chavez was a giant. He was an incredible human being. And then also he had to deal with the economic issues. So that's the context people have to understand when they're saying, oh, they're starving Venezuela. Number one, that's an exaggeration. There are countries that still support Venezuela, like Russia and China. And not only that, they have a socialist system. For example, recently Maduro announced during this virus that for the next 6 months, Venezuelans don't have to pay rent. Here in the United States, we're struggling to have a rent strike. Here in the richest nation on earth, we can't get something like that. And guess what? They have public health care in Venezuela and Cuba. They have public education and PhD in Venezuela and Cuba. They don't have that here. So with what moral authority do we have to judge how they conduct their democracies? Who are we to impose our style of democracy on them? That is the perspective of a lot of people that went to the embassy to try to protect the Venezuelan embassy from a violent fascist takeover backed by the Trump regime, putting the embassy under siege. That is what inspired a lot of us to go there, because we were against empire. And no matter our differences, if we were against the U.S. economic war and sanctions against Venezuela, we were against the potential for U.S. invasion of Venezuela, which has recently increased with the U.S. warships off the coast of Venezuela. That is why we went there, to defend international law, to defend peace, and to defend the dignity of the Venezuelan people.
We definitely get a certain perspective through the mainstream media and things like that. So just real quick, we're going to move on to what happened at the embassy, but just real quick, what is like the main thing that you would like people to know? What would you like to get out there about what is happening in Venezuela, and what are the conditions in Venezuela?
Well, as I described, the context, and David can touch on this a little bit too if he wants. I mean, maybe about like Guaido and stuff. He's done a good job of covering what's really going on with Guaido and Wikipedia. But I can tell you the context again. The economic problems in Venezuela are primarily caused by U.S. pressure and by external forces like the price of oil, which has stayed cheap up till today from 2014 on. But if David wants to get into this fake leader Guaido they were trying to impose on the embassy and the latest updates with that, there are channels out there like Telesur English who does a great job of what's happening down there. But David, maybe you want to allude to that.
So I think the most important thing is that first in 2016, there was an election.
Always elections going on in Venezuela, local and national. They're so democratic. Right. I mean, they have elections every year, all the time.
So they had a presidential election, and Hugo Chavez, no, not Chavez.
Maduro.
Nicolás Maduro won the election in 2016. But while the election was going on, the other side wanted to delegitimize it. So they did everything they could to make it not legitimate, and including preventing election observers from coming to the election. So then once he came in to reauthorize into power.
December 2017 is when Maduro was reelected in the presidency. So he was president from 2013 to 2017. And then at the end of 2017, he was reelected and assumed office in the beginning of 2018. And he is right that the UN observers that wanted to go, that Maduro wanted to receive, the opposition in negotiations with the government said, no, we don't want the UN there. And we know why. because the UN would have done what they always do, and all the international observers would have always done, is said this is the most transparent election we've ever seen.
Yeah, and as we had in the trailer number 2, election observers were there, and the woman from the Carter Center,
Elizabeth Burkhardt, yeah.
Basically, the Carter Center said that Venezuela is one of the best, if not the best, in the world in transparency of elections, unlike U.S.
If you buy a piece of candy here in the United States, right, it costs 10 cents. Do you have a right to a receipt when you buy that piece of candy, Jody?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. In Venezuela, every single citizen who votes gets a receipt of how they voted. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
That's one of many examples. They have an automatic audit, a high percentage audit. I can't think of the percentage right now, but they always have an automatic audit, an automatic recount of their election. And this is based on their agreement with the opposition. So they do things that no other country in the world does. Name me a country where you get a receipt that shows how you vote, where they also have paper ballot, mind you, not just electronic vote. And so you get a receipt showing how you vote. But here in the United States, under a capitalist system, a piece of candy is worth more. You see what I'm saying? And so they have an audit, they have a receipt, they have very transparent elections. They have several political opposition parties. The opposition is very divided. How's that Maduro's fault? If the opposition can't get their act together and make party and take power, what do they advocate? What are the extremists like Guaido, the people that we saw, his racist, xenophobic, classist people that we witnessed in D.C. at the embassy? What do they call for then? They're not just calling for sanctions. They're calling for an invasion of their own country. And Jody, I have the perfect analogy for you. Could you imagine in 2016, Nancy Pelosi said, "Oh, Trump won? I don't like the results of this election. I'm president now. And if you don't like that, Russia's going to come and invade and back me." That's exactly what Guaido did. The Venezuelan people are the proud people of Bolivar. They're very patriotic and proud people. So, of course, I can show you hundreds of videos. Wherever Guaido pops his head out, they start throwing stones. They hate him. You understand? Because he's a traitor. What I don't understand, my only criticism of Maduro, and I said this on Convo Couch, but the only criticism of Maduro is that maybe he's a little too soft with the opposition. Somebody like do something like that here in the United States, and even Chomsky says something similar to this for our film. Somebody do something similar to that here in the United States, they'll be sent to Guantanamo or put before a firing squad for treason. Okay, and Guaido's free to walk the streets of Venezuela, heavily guarded and incognito usually because the people hate him. But that's what they call the president of Venezuela. That's what they put before recently in the State of the Union address. The Democrats stand in an ovation with the Republicans for this puppet, who, guess what? And David can allude to this. He wrote about this on Wikipedia. He's not even head of his party anymore. That was the only justification. They took a part of the Venezuelan Constitution out of context and said, oh, because he's head of the National Assembly, elected, then they say it's legitimate, right? Well, yeah, so he was at one point head of the National Assembly as head of his political party, his oppositional extremist party, called Voluntad Popular, which ironically means popular will. But his little party put him temporarily as head of the assembly. Oh, now I'm president, he says, right? And nobody even heard of Guaido in Venezuela before that. He's much less known than Pelosi is here. But the point I'm trying to make is he lost the justification. Months ago, Parra took over for his party, a gentleman named Parra. He's no saint either. But the point is, Guaido, after Guaido was elected out of his party, he went to the State of the Union. And even the Democrats and Pelosi stood up and applauded him as the president of Venezuela. What kind of nonsense is this? David, maybe you want to allude to that.
Let me go through the chronology of it. And I don't know if Jody's familiar with, or with our listeners are familiar with what happened. Is so first they declared, the opposition declared the election, not legitimate. And then, of course, the U.S. went along with that immediately because it was probably the U.S.'s idea for that to be what they could advocate for, to put their guy in. Guaido, as Al had said, was not known by most the Venezuelans. He never ran to be president. He didn't, basically, I think the U.S. basically told him, don't run, and we want to call this illegitimate. So then January 2019, when Maduro went to be sworn in for office, they said, that's not legitimate. And then they said, well, now he's not able to be, he's incapacitated. The Constitution has a provision that says that the person is unable or unwilling to serve. Then what you do is you give it to the next in line, which would be like here, it would be Pelosi, as Al had made the analogy.
By the way, the Constitution in Venezuela is called the Bolivarian Constitution. It was renamed by Chavez under referendum with the will of the Venezuelan people. It would be kind of like saying Washingtonian Constitution. The point is, they're using the same Constitution and taking things out of context to try to justify. And now they don't even have the justification anymore.
So basically what it said is he's unable or unwilling to serve, like he was incapacitated. Well, those conditions weren't true. So they just interpreted it in a way to say, well, he can't serve, so then it has to go next in line. And of course, the Supreme Court of Venezuela disagreed with that. But the U.S. and all the puppet governments went along.
Autonomous from the government in Venezuela. I would argue their Supreme Court's even more autonomous than ours is.
And so then, then of course the U.S. immediately, I think it was within an hour or within minutes, said as soon as Juan Guaido, he actually didn't do it by he was going through the assembly, but the assembly hadn't quite agreed on what to do. So he just went out to a public square and announced, I am the president. And some of his own people in his party looked at him like, oh my God, what are you doing? And then even the mainstream media got that right. They said, what is going on? How is this guy calling himself the president of Venezuela?
So when you were covering this for Wikipedia, you did an excellent job, by the way. But when you were doing this, you were asking me, remember? I just saw a video of Guaido being blocked from entering the National Assembly. This happened a couple months ago when he lost power. And you said, Alice, can you translate for me what he's saying? So
in 2019, when he was the head of the National Assembly from this little area, I think it's called Vargas. And so most Venezuelans had never heard of this guy. And all of a sudden he says, I'm the president of Venezuela. He's trying to foment a coup. They're going with the U.S. to try to bring in so-called aid, which is probably military equipment that was blocked. There's a whole story behind that if you're interested in that. New York Times
was forced to admit that they gave wrong information on that. They said, yes, that they had blown up their own truck, and we have evidence that the truck was full of guns. That's what the humanitarian aid was, right? Just like they went into Libya for humanitarian purposes, right?
and I think it was another one of those islands in the Gulf, one of the islands near Cuba. A similar thing had happened where they.
Oh, you're talking about Grenada.
Aid.
Grenada, I mean.
Or Haiti, or one of the countries like that.
The Haitian people are very supportive of the Venezuelan government, but we can get into that later. Yeah.
So anyway, then continuing on, basically what Al was talking about is in early 2020, they had another election for the
National Assembly
of Venezuela.
Yeah.
And basically when they voted, Juan Guaido didn't get reelected. Another guy, Parra, was voted in. So he's not the assembly anymore, but the
right.
Insisted that he's still the president of Venezuela.
The party for Maduro is El Partido Socialista Unida. That means the party of United Socialists. And Guaido's extremist minority party is called Popular Will, right? So Parra, who has his faction in Popular Will, negotiated his way in to become head of the assembly. Guaido was elected out. Now, when that happened, David said, Alice, can you translate this video for me? And it was so clear what was going on. So they staged this whole thing, right? Guaido shows up at the National Assembly. They're not letting me in. They're letting me in. What was he actually saying in Spanish? I saw the guards of the National Assembly. They said verbatim, you can come in, Mr. Guaido. You can come in, Mr. Guaido. You can come in. And what was he saying in response? Hold on. I have to consult with some people. He gets on the phone. You know who he's calling. He's calling Washington. And it's the same exact thing that happened in 2018.
What I remember of that story was that he was trying to bring in people who other people who shouldn't have been there.
In 2017, before the elections, the re-election of Maduro of December of 2017, there was negotiations in the Dominican Republic, okay, between the opposition and Maduro to further conditions for what the presidential elections were going to look like, all right? And so they were about to, the same day that they were about to sign the agreement, all of a sudden, Guaido's camp, who were negotiating with Maduro at the time, not the moderates who take part in the election, Guaido's camp, who ultimately boycotted, they said, hold on, we're getting a phone call. You know who they were talking with. They were talking with the Trump regime. And I say regime because Trump didn't get the popular vote. As a matter of fact, Maduro got 67% of the electorate to back him, with two other candidates running against him, including Henry Falcone, who's a moderate oppositionist who had some support. But so Trump lost the popular vote, And Maduro won the vote by 67% with 2 candidates, not one. Who's more legitimate? Okay, this is just logic. It's just basic mathematics. And so they got the phone call and they said, sorry, we're not going to sign this agreement. And then they boycotted. And then the United States, and Henry Falcone admitted this, an oppositionist. The United States tried to pressure Henry Falcone and try to blackmail him to not take part in the elections, but he resisted. Okay? And you even have members of the opposition, and David can get into this. Through his interview with Chomsky for a film, they talked about this, that have compiled statistics, opposition members, not Chavistas, compiling statistics that show tens of thousands of Venezuelans being killed by U.S. sanctions. It's only Guaido that loves, and Guaido's people, that loves these sanctions and that wants his country invaded and to give away all the oil. They represent the elites and the upper echelons of Venezuelan society, not the majority of the people.
Right. And one thing I'd say where I learned a lot of this was when I was editing on Wikipedia, I saw how biased the articles were. So I had to read up. Wikipedia is completely based on reliable sources. So I would read all the reliable sources. Of course, one of the things they quickly did was shortly after Juan Guaido was chosen to be the president by the U.S. president, and it was really more like Pompeo and who's the other guy now?
Oh, Bolton, who was fired for lying to Trump about Venezuela?
Right. Pompeo and Bolton, and then Trump went along with it.
But don't forget Elliot Abrams, convicted war criminal, pardoned by Reagan, gun smuggler, convicted, trying to smuggle guns from Colombia to Venezuela. This is what their humanitarian aid was, right?
Yeah, and I think he was pardoned by one of the Republicans.
Yes, he was a gun smuggler in Central America, and Reagan pardoned him. This is the people that we're dealing with. This was the envoy. And everybody has to look up, if they haven't seen, Congresswoman Omar taking to town Elliot Abrams and saying, why are you the envoy for another Latin American country after being convicted of gun smuggling in Central America? She actually did the job of what Congress people are supposed to do.
And that's when I got interested in this, is when I saw Code Pink showing up at the I don't know if it's called, it's not really a confirmation hearing, but a hearing to talk about, are we going to have Elliot Abrams be the liaison to Venezuela? And I'm like, Elliot Abrams, of all the people, to bring him up, that an Iran-Contra guy, I couldn't believe it. So I was really impressed with that Code Pink went through the effort to organize to disrupt that hearing, and that Ilhan Omar spoke and said the truth, which most of the rest of even Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and the liberals, they don't talk about it that much.
Not even AOC.
Tulsi did, though. And
guess what? Omar doesn't call herself a socialist, but just out of decency, she said the truth that day.
Absolutely. And I think, just like you said, that's what they're supposed to be doing, right? This is what these people are supposed to be doing. So let's get to the embassy. I mean, let's talk about, basically what led you to be protecting the embassy.
I got there in early May, and, my first and foremost priority was getting food and water and supplies to my comrades inside. I was not interested in filming. I was not interested in making a movie or anything like that. My primary concern as an activist for the past 19 years, people that I've known for at least 10 years inside, okay, Kevin and Margaret included, lives were being put at risk. People that I respect and love for years, lives were being put at risk. And that was my number one priority in my mind. From the moment I arrived and went, the first thing I did when I got to the steps of the embassy was look for the nearest pharmacy to go buy food, to put food in the bag. And I called Medea up. First thing I did. By then, Medea had already left the building, but she was coordinating outside to try to bring food in. From the moment I left to the moment I arrived, every day throughout the night, that was my obsession. That was my passion, was to get food and water inside. Later on, this idea transpired with David to do the film, because we didn't see another film transpiring yet, or we didn't see the media doing a proper job of covering what happened, even with national figures like Jesse Jackson getting involved, which David can tell you about. But that was my priority, okay? And so at one point, about 3 in the morning, I think I got to the embassy about 3:15 in the morning, okay? And so I luckily was able, through my contacts, because I didn't have money, to stay at a hotel for free. And this hotel was very close to the embassy, about a 15-minute walk. So I woke up in the middle of the night, because I'm not usually up at 3 a.m. And this was after a long day of taking part in action to try to get food in. So I get up in the middle of the night, and I just get this intuition, And I had talked to Kevin about this on my podcast too after he got out of jail. But I just got this intuition that you need to go down to the embassy right now. No text, no email, nothing. I just got this feeling, that happens to me sometimes in my life. It happened when I was in Standing Rock as well. You mentioned earlier I'm a water protector, but I just got this intuitive thing from the inner spirit that said something's going on. You need to go down there now. Prior to that, don't remember ever meeting David. He was there. He was there, but we never really conversed or anything like that. So I got down there, okay? And the first person I walk into is David. We introduce ourselves. We're not sure who's who. We start talking about the people that we know. We start showing pictures of each other around the embassy. We start getting comfortable with one another. All of a sudden, Margaret starts yelling out the window. Dr. Margaret Flowers. Al, help me. Al, they're breaking in from behind. They're trying to get through the garage. Immediately, we found a homeless gentleman named Eric. And there's footage of this in Trailer 2 Revised. Everybody's looked up on YouTube. So Eric, his name's Eric, right, David?
Yeah, Eric is correct.
Yes, and Eric was not even really an activist, but he understood what was going on. He was intelligent enough. He was saying, well, we know there's Americans inside that need our help, so I'm going to help you guys out. So I gave Eric my phone. Nothing fancy. The footage is not very good quality, but it's a moment in our history. And so I said, Eric, take the phone. David and I are crossing the street. We're going to find out what's going on with Margaret. And so we cross over to the other side of the embassy through the lines of defense of the oppositionists that were camped outside to prevent us from getting supplies in. We went around the side, and we were able to get pretty close to where the garage went, but we still weren't sure exactly where it was. All of a sudden, diplomatic police show up, and they don't want to do anything. These are guys that trained international law. They're standing on the sidelines, letting them try to break through the garage where they could potentially set the place on fire, kill our comrades. We don't know what's going to happen. But it's just David and me versus like 20 or 30 Venezuelan exiles right there, backed by the diplomatic police and the DC Metro cops. And so that was the dramatic episode that happened that's going to be in our film, that's going to be exposed, where we were putting pressure on them, even though it was only two of us, to not break in. And later I brought a reinforcement with me, a comrade, Russell Johnson, a veteran, who was doing some filming as well, to try to put pressure on them to stop trying to break in. But God only knows what would have happened if I was not there at that moment, because Margaret's known me for a long time. She recognized me at the window and she called for help. There was nobody else around. It was just David and me and Eric, from what I recall, on our side, I mean. And they were camped out all night, and they were constantly trying to break in. And we didn't have enough organization at that point to have people all night ready there. But because of that intuition that I got, I was at the right place at the right time. Something similar happened to me in Standing Rock. We don't have to get into that. But the point is, as an activist, I felt my obligation from the moment I got there to the moment I left was to get food in. And one of the last things I said when I left on May 13th was, we need a national figure here. We need a national figure. I don't know who. I just said, we need a national figure here because they're trying to starve our comrades inside, who are malnourished. Many of them are elders, and they're forced to collect rainwater to survive. Okay? Electricity, water cut off, completely under siege for several days, and the summer was coming on. And guess what happened? A national figure did show up, and that was Jesse Jackson. But David can attest to that.
Yeah, I wanted to fill in a couple things that Al hadn't said that were interesting. So with the garage thing, when we went to the back, the way it was set up, basically we found the Secret Service and we said they're trying to break in the garage, and they're like, "Oh no, nothing happened. We've been here all night. We haven't seen anything. Nothing's happening." And we knew that was a lie, because Margaret wouldn't have said that otherwise. You could hear it in her voice. So I'm going to show you this diagram. Hopefully you can
oh, wow.
Let's see. Yeah, it's hard to see. But basically the driveway is like this. And then there's this vehicle. It's probably bigger than this. It was Secret Service vehicle blocking the driveway. And so then they had two Venezuelan exiles on this side and this side. And then they had a column of them. So if we wanted to go down here where the garage was, you'd have to go right through them.
You'd have to go to the line of defense. And I'm telling you, a lot of these Venezuelans were paramilitary trained, quite possibly by the CIA, but they had professionals there that were intentionally trying to block us.
And so when we went there, we went to the Secret Service guy and we said, we would like you to go, we'd like you to go down there and check and then put the door down, because they had forcibly tried to raise the door. And they said, no, we don't need to do that. Nothing's happening here. And then we said, well, can you lead us down there? And then they're like, no, we can't do that. They're completely unapologetic. And he goes, you know what we can do? I'll tell you what, we'll tell them, don't do that anymore. In just that tone.
When I came back half an hour later with Russell, those same diplomatic cops were gone. There was other cops there. They let them do whatever they wanted. And I tell you, Eric was filming, and I said, Eric, turn the camera off. I need to call Margaret. At that point, it was no longer about exposing what's going on. It's about saving lives. And I called Margaret up, and I put her on the speakerphone. You were there for that, David. And she's telling them, I'm in the garage right now. They're trying to break in. And they still did nothing. And there's hundreds of examples of things like that happening. There was a dramatic episode that happened in the daytime.
You guys have it on film of, the police officers and asking the police officers.
I didn't know until several weeks later when I was back in Florida. But little did I know, a comrade of ours named Morgan was situated in a very good spot up on a hill and filming the exact moment, May 13th, the infamous Mateo. We're going to expose him and many others in our film. He's a Venezuelan exile, a pilot. Maybe he was involved in a coup attempt. We don't know. But Mateo, who also tried to attack Jesse Jackson, and David can get into that. That was a couple days later. I'm telling you what I witnessed May 13th, and David was there helping out as well. We got to the side of the building. And how did we get to the side of the building? I'll tell you. The night before, Medea authorized me to film the side of the building to get to see the line of defenses. So everything was prepared. We were part of that action. There was a miscommunication. This is what happened. So I was with a comrade named Chad, a veteran, a member of Veterans for Peace, Chad Hubbs. And so Chad said, Al, wait here at this little bridge, and when we get the signal, we're going to run to the side of the building. I said, what's the signal? He said, I don't know. And so all of a sudden, we heard some yelling, and Chad just took off. And I followed behind him and ran as fast as I could. I'm not in that very good shape, but just the adrenaline kicked in.
Me too, right behind him.
Caught in, and we just started running. David was on the other side. He also ran there. And we ran. And there was a part that Chad and I got through, very small crevice. Cops were trying to block us from getting inside the building. But when you have adrenaline in you like that, nothing stops you. Maybe a bullet, but nothing else stops you. And so we ran through. And we got there. And the first thing I saw was Mateo, and you see him in the video there. I hope you're playing it a couple times. So you see Mateo. It's kind of hard to see when you're only watching it once, but he's wearing a blue jacket, and he's having a tug of war. And there's a backpack with supplies that we're trying to get in. And I'm like, oh my God, it's Aminta. So Aminta Zaya, who was a very important protector, she was severely malnourished and injured. So this is what happened. She had just recently got out of the embassy. She had been there almost towards the end. She jumped one of the hills that was there and landed on her feet and hurt herself. And so here she is. She just came out. She's malnourished, under siege for 30 plus days they were. And she there by herself, nobody helping her. And a grown man, probably had paramilitary training, Mateo, is holding onto that bag and taking it from her hands. I show up there, they're right in front of me. At that point, survival instinct. I go and I grab the bag that he was trying to take away from Aminta, and I wrestle him down to the ground. And then David shows up, and he comes from behind. And at that point, he gets the bag from without. So I stuck him down the ground, got the bag out of his grip. At that moment, David prevented him from stealing it, like they've always stolen the bags, and we had a victory that day. And we got the bag out. And I accompanied Anita, so she should get some medical help after that. So luckily, she wasn't too badly hurt. But the most emotional moment for me in the entire episode was getting home and seeing this moment that David's about to talk to you about. So again, I left with the notion that we need a national figure out here. Lives are at risk. And I know the determination of Kevin and Margaret. I knew it could have been fatal. So I went home worried all the time about what was going to happen to my comrades inside the building. I saw this video of Jesse Jackson showing up. I think it was from David's footage. And so Jesse Jackson finally shows up. He gets these bags. They're putting these bags up on the rope. And there's Mateo trying to stop him, and David will get into that. The point is, of those 3 or 4 bags that I saw lifted, at that moment, I recognized that one of the bags that went up was the one that we got out. And I started to break down. But to be there for that moment in history and to help make a difference, to be a small part of that, was something that I'll never forget.
I'm sure.
One thing I wanted to add that happened that first day is that the police actually cut the cord to the food that was being delivered.
You hear the audio of it.
You can see it. I've looked at it from a bunch of different angles, and there's no question about it that they cut the cord.
They tried to print it in, yeah.
And it's even in actually my footage, you can hear it too and see it. And what's amazing is because the Medea calls them. She has it's posted online where she calls the Secret Service and says, food is being blocked, and we want to bring food and supplies and medical equipment and water inside. And then she calls the Secret Service and said, can we do something about it? And they hang up. They don't hang up on her. They just immediately put a recording on that says, "This is the Secret Service. We're here to serve and protect. And when it comes to the embassy, we're doing all we can do, and we're doing the best job possible. And we would never block supplies. We're always letting everything that needs to go in, go in." It was a complete lie. And we saw it firsthand. I couldn't actually believe it. That's one of the reasons I went down. As soon as I found out about that kind of thing going on, I'm like, I've got to be there for that. That's just outrageous. We as Americans or from anywhere can't allow this to happen. That's just not acceptable.
You drove all the way from Ohio to get out there. That says something.
Right. And Al came all the way up from the south.
Florida, but I didn't drive.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's a big deal to come. There were a lot of people from all over the country who came. But of course, the opposition and the Secret Service were under the belief we were taking orders from Russia.
White privilege. There were so many people of color and immigrants and people of Latin background and socialists and, people that are so about inclusivity. And then they would come at us and say, "Oh, white privilege," because some Code Pink people with Medea Benjamin that were there were, white or middle class, whatever. And so they tried to do that to us, and it's comical. And you see in trailer 2, everybody check out trailer 2 revised. We have the audio that's much better there. But yeah, you see in trailer 2, we interviewed a very important figure in the Code Pink movement who's a Venezuelan, mind you, Venezuelan American socialist. His name's Leo Flores. He's one of the Latin American coordinators for Code Pink. And he tells us verbatim, and we showed in the trailer, that he witnessed a white Venezuelan girl yelling at 2 black guys, 2 black socialists there that were there to support us, "You're white privilege." This has really happened. This is the absurdity that we're dealing with, right? And I talked about it on Common Culture the other day. Every other word they would say is maricón, indio de mierda. And if you speak Spanish, these are the worst, most homophobic, most racist things you could say to people. And this is constantly what they were saying because that's how they are. These are the upper elites of Venezuelan society.
With Aminta, she's on record. She says that they said to her, "You're so ugly, we can see the Native American in your face."
And they called her an India de mierda, which means, I hate to swear, but it means shitty Indian, So that's the people we were dealing with.
And then the one guy, he looked up and said, "Your mother should have swallowed."
Exactly. And a lot of them spoke English quite well for being Venezuelans. One of them told me they were born in Miami. But these were the exile, upper class, very arrogant, fully backed by Trump in the state. And actually, when I interviewed Kevin, he revealed that one of the days that he had a guard in the garage, he could hear the cops changing shifts and telling the new cops, "You guys don't know anything what's going on here, right?" No. Basically, the guys inside, they're paid by Russia. All these people out here, they're government. What does that mean? That means the Venezuelans that were there were untouchable, except for people like Leo Flores, of course. And that the people inside, they use the whole Russian BS. You see how they do that?
To say that Roy Molina, the one who said your mother should have swallowed.
Oh yeah, he's not even Venezuelan. He's Nicaraguan. We know who he is. We're going to expose him.
Right. I wanted to say when I first showed up, he was the first person to confront me. And it was really like a military operation. It was like a platoon of 3 guys came up to me. Yeah. They came up to me and they didn't know who I was. And they immediately were suspicious because I was near the embassy, and they told me, "You're not allowed to photograph that building." I mean, it was truly amazing that they were treating it like a military
David,
operation.
Tell her the truth. Come on, people want to hear the comical side of the story.
There's a canal that's right next to the embassy, and it's the C&O Canal. It's a beautiful thing. The whole thing's preserved. It's like 182 miles. And so I had a book about it, so I brought it, and I was just going to pretend. It was a little late. It was like 3 a.m, and I was going to just pretend.
You're a night owl.
Yeah, I'm a night owl. I had my coffee. So I was going to pretend like I was checking out the canal, so I was photographing the canal. And then, he said, "You can't take a picture of the building." I said, "Oh, no, I'm just taking a picture of the the canal. I showed him the book, and he's like, he was suspicious right away. So, and then, so I would, I had to test him. So I walked to the front of the building, and I wanted to ask the cops, were you really not letting food in? Try to kind of trip them up and see. And so, but then I took pictures of the building on the other side of the street, and I went to take a picture of the embassy again to see what they would do. And they were flashing lights in my eyes too, by the way. And I told the guy, I said, you need to stop that. They do it. It's harassing. Oh, you didn't know, but yeah, they were shining lights.
That's actually assault, Jody. They were putting lasers, which could cause permanent eye damage, into the eyes of old women. I witnessed that personally. And Medea was forced, because she was one of the main targets, they all knew who she was, to wear special lenses to prevent herself from being permanently blind from these people. They did it in broad daylight in front of all the authorities, and nothing was done. And at times the authorities, and there's a video of this, of the president of Veterans for Peace, Jerry Condon, being beaten by the Secret Service in broad daylight for trying to bring a zucchini up, okay, for bringing a vegetable to the building. They said it was a projectile. And they beat him bloody, 70-year-old gentleman, in broad daylight. So when the Venezuelans were assaulting us, beating us or putting lasers in our eyes, or blaring in our ears with their loudspeakers, the police themselves were doing the beatings. So it's very scary that they thought that they could get away with something like this. And I just want to say, I actually had a similar intention to David when I showed up. I don't even know if I've ever told him this. Now that we're thinking about about the embassy, you forget certain things. So when I first showed up, because I speak Spanish, I wanted to talk to the Venezuelans and them not necessarily know who I am. I think they figured out who I was pretty quickly, though. You know why? Medea, again, this is somebody just like Margaret and Kevin I've known for 10 years. She shows up, and as soon as Medea shows up, this is the first time I saw her. I just talked to her on the phone earlier. It's the first time I saw her since I arrived there. They start yelling at her, and Medea speaks perfect Spanish. She used to live in Cuba. They start yelling at her, terrorista, 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 which means terrorist. And so what did I do? I gave her a big hug right in front of them. So I think at that point, I just couldn't hold back, So I think at that point they figured out who I was.
Yes, it's kind of a giveaway.
I learned quickly that being incognito is much harder than I thought. I mean, this guy figured me out within 5 minutes. But it was partly.
Especially today in Bolivia, it's very hard to be incognito.
That's the incognito hat.
The 4 protectors in the end, right? So Dr. Margaret Flowers, Dr. Adrian Pine, David Paul, Kevin Zeese, the 4 last remaining protectors that were arrested inside, complete violation of international law. I was asked, did they resist? And so what I forgot to say was, they did not resist at all. They had an agreement that if once the police got into the building, that they would not resist. They wouldn't do what Assange did. No disrespect to Assange, he's great. But they wouldn't do what Assange did. They would not drop to the ground. They completely cooperated once the police came in and they had the zip ties and all of that, okay?
Just to finish the thing with the canal thing, so, I took the pictures, and then the guy's like, you can't take a picture of the building. I already told you. And I said, well, why can't I take a picture of the embassy? And he's like, you knew it was the embassy. You're what did he call me? A fake or something?
Yeah. That's when you got caught, David. You're not a very good spy.
I'm trying to remember the word he used. And so then every time I saw him, he's always like, how's that canal going?
Actually, I heard one of the Venezuelans yell out, wait a minute, that's the canal guy.
Yep. So you wanted me to talk about Jesse Jackson.
And Baraka. Don't forget Ajamu Baraka.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of the important things. I mean, basically Jesse came and he was going to do a symbolic food delivery. And if you listen to the video, you can tell I said that I didn't think that we were going to get it up, because every time we tried to bring food up, it was always blocked. Well, not every time. There were successful ones, but it was very difficult because the opposition would basically set up their guys. They'd steal the food, and then the police would do nothing about it. And so when I went up, I was right next to Jesse Jackson filming. And then Kevin Zeese threw down the black bag. Which, basically what they do is they transfer the food from one backpack into that one, and then they pull it up and then they throw it back down again. And so the police had cut the line the previous time, but this time, so it comes down,
Just in
And
case he's
then-
talking about that day with the Minta. When I was able to get the bag out, the original bag that they were lifting up with the other bags in it, the cops actually came, and you can hear in the audio, and they pretended they didn't, but they cut the rope. That's the extent of how they tried to stop food from getting in.
Yeah, so this time, again, they'd reset up the rope and they threw it down. Kevin Z's threw it down. And then he had to be careful because he didn't want to hit one of the cops in the head because at this point they had a boundary where the cops were surrounding the building. They had forced the exiles away from the building and put a police barrier. I don't know why they didn't do that earlier. So at that point, they threw the bag down, and then they were in the process of loading it. And then Mateo, who was right on top of Jesse Jackson the whole time, saying, "Oh, my people, my poor people, you're causing them to starve. You know, to give this food to my people," and all this bullshit.
You know what I would have told him? I said, "You're starving your grandmother. You're starving your people,
Right?
because you're backing the sanctions."
Yeah. Well, people were saying that, and then so he acts all quiet and peaceful. And then all of a sudden, this hand comes out from him, grabbing the bag, and that was the one time the Washington Post got it right. They did have an article about it, like grab the bag
Under tremendous pressure.
Yeah, and then we ended up wrestling with him, so I think Ajama Baraka was the one I think was the most vigorous in getting. Mateo's
For those people who
off
don't
of
know
there.
who's who, Medea Benjamin, who kept referring to, she's the founder of Code Pink, one of the founders of Code Pink, and Baraka is vice president candidate for the Greens 2016 alongside Jill Stein. So he's a pretty important activist, and he was there right alongside his friend Jesse Jackson.
So then, and then Ann Wright was there too, and just
Ann
telling
Wright,
him, you have no authorization for this. How can you do this? And the police were just standing by doing nothing. And then eventually they got his hand off the bag, and then we pushed him. I didn't want to get an assault charge, so I didn't want to try to touch him, but I was trying to keep him away so I would block his path. So we were able to keep him away, and eventually he gave up. I think he might have even done it twice, where they got his hand off and then he put
From
it
what
in.
I saw, Baraka was putting all his might, and I talked to Baraka about this afterwards. Remember, it's the same guy I dealt with, Mateo. He's pretty strong. But Baraka, who's not that young either, but he would put the full force of his body behind Mateo's so he could stop trying to reach to steal Jesse Jackson's bag, which of course the cops did nothing about. And that's how those bags were successfully able to get up. No, David?
Yeah, that's correct. That he definitely was. I mean, I wasn't right there when he was doing that. I was focusing on Mateo, and then I was telling the cops, "You need to arrest this guy. You know, he just tried to steal the food." And then I have them where they just go like that. I swear to God, it's in the video.
David started yelling, right, David? Remember, you were like, "This is a thief! This is a thief! He did this before. This is a thief!" And then another activist yelled out, "White supremacist! White supremacist!" Mateo was trying to attack Reverend Jesse Jackson, for God's sakes, and they still didn't do anything. And most of the media still didn't cover what was really happening.
But what was amazing was that eventually Mateo gave up, and then none of his comrades came, and we got 4 bags up, and some of that stuff was mine.
That quote of the newspapers after that. He said, "I'm so sad." He was so used to losing. We had a victory on the 13th. We had a victory that day, I believe it was the 15th of May, right? So they were used to always winning and getting what they want, these spoiled brats. But we taught them something that day.
So we got 4 deliveries up. It was quite amazing. I have to say I was very impressed with Kevin Zese's throwing of the bag. I mean, if he was up like 2 or 3
Lost a lot of
stories.
weight.
He threw it down,
Yep.
and the cops are all over. If he had hit one of them in the head, it would have been bad news. But somehow he was able to do it, and after 4, they figured we got enough stuff now.
When there's a
The last delivery, I had put in a power supply I just bought because I wanted them to have some power as a pink power supply.
Now, there's a gentleman named Al Gritowski who I want to give kudos to, a veteran. We spent the night at his home in North Carolina on the way to D.C. back in January. He was there with us at the embassy. And, Kevin, when he came on my show after he got out of jail, he mentioned, "I don't know who brought this turkey, the Spam turkey. Somebody got us a bag of Spam turkey. We loved it. We don't know who did it." I get a call from Al. He said, "Yeah, that was my bag." He said he made sure it was turkey Spam, so it was more healthy,
Yeah, they're gonna have the embassy protector cookbook.
Yeah, they had to collect
working on.
rainwater.
I'm
They had
ready
to
for
make
that.
pasta with water that was room temperature. It's incredible what they had to do.
They're collecting water on the roof,
Yeah.
And I think they had a water filtration thing. And I was amazed they had some way of going to the bathroom. I think that was one of the things I asked them about. How did you handle that problem? And they actually had a pretty sanitary way of doing it, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Got to MacGyver it. Wow, that's that's just amazing. I mean, this whole story, and of course, in the video, you can see that the police aren't just standing there. They're just, everyone, in the crowd is yelling, and they're just standing there, like refusing to say anything, or literally hands up, like.
Now, I'm sure David can get into the legalities here. He has a paralegal background, but let me tell you a little bit about the hearing that David and I went to back in January. We were not sure if there was going to be a mistrial or there was going to be a no conviction.
Well,
The way that they suppressed evidence, it looked like everything was lined up against the four.
Let's back up a little bit and talk about how it ended. So how did it get to, how did the embassy protectors end up, being taken
David
out?
was there for the raid, the second raid. The first raid, they didn't arrest them. But go ahead, Dave, talk about those raids.
Actually, I was there for both.
Right.
Well, I was there for the first one, but not the second one, actually.
But you got there after that. They had to march when they got out of jail to the White House and all that.
Yeah. So basically, and the picture that I have on the fundraiser for our film is a picture of all these people with cameras pointing at the embassy, all eager, and then the Secret Service are right there, and they're just about to go in the first time. And the first time when they went in the background, Medea and others, the leaders, were trying to negotiate for a peaceful exit. Well, what happened was they went in and they were trying to convince the four that were still, I think there might have been 5 at that point, I forget, but there was definitely 4 inside. And I think maybe the others were leaving while the police were coming in because they didn't want to get arrested. So the 4 inside were negotiating. And I think Kevin, he's an attorney, so he was negotiating with them. And he did such a good job. There was an attorney in the front, Mara, I'm trying to think of her last name. And she is excellent too. But I think actually Kevin
it's Van Hayward or something. Mara Van Hayward, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so Kevin, I think, was actually doing most of the negotiating with them. And there are these young guys. And Kevin, I think, just had so much self-confidence and peacefulness. And he said, look, you guys, if you come in here, you're violating international law. That's on you. You could be prosecuted or something like that. I don't know exactly what he said.
Well, can I say something else here, David?
Yeah, please.
And I want us to put this in the film. Kevin literally told them, go back to your superiors. This will have implication for U.S. bases and embassies throughout the world. If you come and violate the Vienna Convention and violate international law on sovereign, sacred Venezuelan territory, it puts all of our buildings in jeopardy abroad. And what I want to put in the film, and David and I will have to discuss this, but I'm going to release this out there for the first time to see what people think, is after we put that quote from Kevin, and we'll get the exact quote from him. We're gonna go and interview him, but as soon as this virus ends, right? But what I want to put in there is the Baghdad American consulate Baghdad attack, because Press TV, okay, and I don't know if we can prove this, but there could be a parallel here. Press TV is a very well-known English language Iranian channel that did a very good job about what was happening at the embassy. And a lot of Iraqi Shia, including probably some of those people that went and protested or rioted at the U.S. consulate there, watched that. So maybe what Kevin foresaw that could happen, what they did later, had implications of what happened in Baghdad. Okay,
so back to what I was saying. I think it was Mara Van Hilliard Hayden. I think that's her name. And then so what Al said was correct about that. Kevin told them, you're going to set a precedent. If you come in here and break the Vienna Convention, it's going to put all of the embassies at risk, all the American embassies throughout the world. And, I know, like I'm old enough. I remember the embassy in Iran when it got invaded. I mean, that's the kind of
the thing that you're basically enabling other countries to do when you say, we're not going to respect the Vienna Convention. Well, then why would you expect them to respect it in their countries? So he convinced these, I mean, they're pretty young guys, and they're like, you know what? I don't want to do it. So they walked out.
We need to go talk to our superior.
Really? Did they really say that? And it was interesting because, most of us at the time, and all the exiles, they knew what was going to happen. They knew that they were going to go in there and try to take him out. And they were all excited. They're like,
When they first turned the electricity off, and several days passed where the resistance inside kept up, but they turned the electricity off. And the day that they turned the electricity off, all the opposition was applauding. They're going in today. It's all over. They underestimated the determination of the activists inside. They were humbled by their determination and the resistance of the activists inside.
So that particular day, what had happened, it was like maybe 5 o'clock. I was there through that day, around 5 o'clock or so, or maybe a little bit later. They started clearing off all the people who had been camped out. The Secret Service let all the exiles and opposition to surround the building. They didn't let any of the people who wanted to protect the embassy from getting close, and the exiles would become violent and nasty. If you got too close, they'd yell at you and shine lights in your eyes and so on. Well, anyway, they'd camp out all night long. You'd never get near it. That's why the food deliveries were so hard. And then that day, the Secret Service told them they got to go, and they didn't complain, which that to me was a red flag right there, because they would have been pissing and moaning. So they knew that the reason they were being removed was because that the police were going to go in and try to take out the final people.
Jody, let me tell you something real quick. We have footage of this, okay? I believe Fort Fisher took it. We have some footage of this. We're gonna probably show it in the film. There was only one Venezuelan gentleman that I know of who was detained, not arrested. Remember, a lot of us were arrested just for looking at the opposition the wrong way, right? But there was only one Venezuelan exile gentleman that was detained that I know of, and one Venezuelan woman who was arrested. She was back again soon after I saw her there. We have footage of her with a bag full of drugs. Who knows what these drugs were, and if she was distributing them, if they were speed, if they were using it to stay up all night. God knows what it was. It has to be looked into. The point is, there's footage of a Venezuelan woman being arrested. That was the only time that they said, okay, this is enough. And then she was welcomed back there. And they trespassed so many of us for BS, that she could go back there because she's an untouchable. She's one of the exiles. But all the other assaults and harassment and all the types of barbarities that the opposition did, not a single other arrest that I know of.
So then what happened was the exiles and the other opposition people who were told that they had to leave, instead of complaining, they were almost cheering. They were all happy. They're in a really good mood. They're singing. They're like, Americans out, or whatever they said, phrases like that. And there was a very good mood on their part. And of course, on our side, we were kind of like, oh, bummer. But I have to admit, some of us were kind of like, okay, finally, this is going to be over too. And I think almost everyone believed that it was going to be over, and that the police would go in, and force them to come out. And then the police did go in, and then Kevin talked them out of it. And so the police came back out, and of course our side started to cheer, and the exiles were so upset.
That's when Dr. Adrian Pine had the sign that said coup failed.
Yes, that's right. And then
right, David?
Right after that,
they failed again. So many times Guaido tried to do coups against Maduro, and every time they failed, they say, guess what? Here, that's a microcosm to this. You're trying to sanction the people inside like you sanction your own country. Guess what? Coup failed again. I would have loved to have been there at that moment. The opposition was
it was amazing. It was amazing. Yeah, because that's correct. Right after they closed the doors and the Secret Service went out and locked it up. And, people had to kind of figure out, well, what's really going on? Why did they walk out? Because we didn't know for sure. But when they started putting the twist ties back on, we knew that they were going to stay inside. And then right at the same moment, they put coup fail out. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing. But then I think it was either the next day or 2 days later. I can't remember the exact order. Then they went in, probably early in the morning, and I'm a night owl, so that's probably why I missed it. They came in early in the morning, and they brought stormtroopers it was, I mean, yeah. I mean, they had military
like
guys,
military
with big
takeover.
guns and stuff. I mean, these are peace activists. There's no guns in there.
Mm.
I don't know. Maybe they're just being cautious, but it was outrageous, because they said that they would leave peacefully. But one of the problems was the police. One of the reasons the first time that they went in, they didn't actually go in. They just went in the vestibule, but they didn't actually go into the embassy. And so Kevin talked them out of crossing the line. Kevin wanted to cross the line to go into outside of the territory, and they were afraid to go in. So this line that was there was key to keeping it for a couple more days. So I was just incredibly impressed that they
Something that I witnessed that Kevin did that was very powerful was when he went up to the window. Often they went to the window to say hi to their comrades and to show the opposition they weren't afraid that they were still there. And you could see that he was malnourished, had lost a lot of weight, but he still had this force, this determination you could see in his face. And at that moment, he had a giant portrait from inside the embassy, a beautiful portrait that they probably burned now, of Hugo Chavez. That is the moral force of Chavism that was embodied in Kevin Z's at that moment, in a moment of history. It was almost as if the spirit of Chavez was there to lift them up and to give them the strength that they needed against all odds over 30 days under siege, where most of the American people were kept in the dark. And that's why we're doing this film, so the truth will come out.
So they did end up being taken out, and there was a trial following. Were you guys there for that, or?
Yeah, David was there twice for that. I was only there at the
I was
hearing.
there twice, and it
Why don't you
was
talk about the first hearing, David.
kangaroo court. I could.
Yeah,
call it.
exactly.
Yeah, tell us about it.
So basically, they didn't actually charge them with trespassing, which is interesting because they weren't trespassing. They were there at the permission of the elected government. So instead, they charged them with interfering with protective function because basically, under the Vienna Convention, the Secret Service is required to protect the building from, a right-wing group of people.
Tell them about that little crayoned sign without its signature that claimed it was trespassing.
I didn't mention this.
There. Yeah.
I actually filmed this too, and I probably actually do have footage there from that same day. Before Kevin talked the guys out of it, they put up these pieces of paper. I saw them. They tore down all the signs and stuff that were outside, and then they put up these little white pieces of paper that were typed, and it was sort of like an eviction thing. And I am a paralegal. I can't give legal advice. I'm not an attorney, but we prepared evictions, and it was a piece of junk. I've never seen anything so bad. It wasn't in crayon, but it might as well have been. It just said, to whoever's in here, you're not authorized to be here. And I think it might have had a date, but it didn't have like letterhead. It wasn't from a law firm. It wasn't signed. It's like, who wrote this thing? And then they got.
They were too afraid to attach their name to it because they knew it was an illegal order.
Could be. I mean, I'm very curious. I'd love if somebody sometime figures out who it was who ordered it and who it was who refused to sign it. Because I think that's what must have happened.
All of that was suppressed. Almost all the evidence that the four asked for in discovery was suppressed. You've gone to courts your whole life, David. You have a paralegal background. Have you ever seen anything this absurd before in the United States?
Well, yeah.
Immigration court. I know you used to go to immigration court and they had injustices. I'm talking about U.S. citizens here. Have you ever witnessed anything like that?
Well, yeah, the FISA court.
The FISA court's a rubber stamp, right? But I never knew you were president of FISA court because I'm talking about courts where you were present, man.
Anyway, every legal case is different, so I don't want to generalize. I just know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
When I see a kangaroo court going on, and it was a kangaroo court there, and then one of the most outrageous things is that the government got the judge to make a ruling that they couldn't talk about who was the president of Venezuela.
At first, the judge said, tell me if I'm wrong, David. At first, the judge said, in this courtroom, the president's Guaido. They have to go with what Trump says. Then they said, oh, we're not going to even discuss that's irrelevant. How is that irrelevant? International law says they had a right to be there until a third country was going to take it over. Turkey offered. The negotiations were there. Trump sent a representative to speak with Maduro, the real president. They were negotiating a transfer. The Swiss were going to take over the U.S. Embassy in Caracas, and the Turks, the Venezuelan Embassy in D.C. Even when Cuba under Kennedy broke diplomatic relations, they had a third country take over the Cuban embassy. Never in the history of the United States and diplomatic relations has something like this happened before. Complete disregard for the law.
So basically, they were trying to do the first time I went, they were trying to do discovery, which is exchanging of documents that are pertinent to the action at hand. And basically, I saw the judge. She was pretty hostile to our side. I was surprised how nasty. But we had to sit there for maybe 3 hours before it got to our case, which is normal, where you don't know when you're going to show up, and in the proceedings. So I saw the way she treated other cases, and she was often hostile to both parties, or one party and not the other. And so it wasn't entirely surprising, but I was not used to that from a judge. Most judges are kind of quiet and even-handed. It depends on the situation. So basically when I saw her, I had the impression she was almost like saying, guys, since you guys are guilty, why do you want to do discovery? Why do you want to do anything? It's like, and even one of the attorneys stood up and said, are you presuming we're guilty already? And then she kind of backed off a little bit. But yeah, she was, like the soup, like the soup Nazi in the Seinfeld episode. It was that bad. I couldn't believe it. I might regret saying this. Like, oh, you want to practice law? So yeah, she's the head judge in D.C. So it was amazing.
She's actually the federal judge that was responsible for the Patriot Act. Go figure.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah, right. And then she wanted the case. Wonder why. So they had actually changed.
They switched it to another judge, and
right.
She volunteered. Pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, and then they thought that she was going to be better than some of the other possible judges that might get it. But I was like, oh boy, you thought this was better? So what ended up happening was, the discovery they wanted to find out about the things that, where I was talking about, like what kind of internal communications was going on. She just said, no. And then she wanted to proceed, pretty quickly. And then ultimately what happened was that there was a mistrial. The first time that they went through, it was a mistrial because all the stuff that was not permitted to be said in the trial confused the jurors. So they were like, what's going on here? Something's not right. So two of the jurors said, no go.
Okay, so we went in the morning when we were in D.C. towards the end of January to see one of their hearings as their case was moving forward. And from what I remember, I believe the legal term was intent, and David can correct me on that. The fight was whether or not they could have their last grasp of the defense, right? Otherwise, they would have to say they didn't understand the order. And we were talking about a PhD, a physician, David Paul, a male nurse, a practicing lawyer, Kevin Z's. They're highly intelligent people that would understand an order. So that would have been their only defense. And then there would be no way that they would have won. So they were trying to hang on to intent because there's a difference between trespassing, which they could not charge them with, and interfering in a lawful order. Their argument was that their intention was not to obey an unlawful order. And that's why when they left the sign, there was no institution that signed on to back up the claim for trespassing, and why they didn't charge them with trespassing at all.
Basically, when you prosecute something, often they have to prove like multiple prongs, multiple elements, like 1, 2, 3. So one of the elements in criminal is often what they call the mens rea, which is a criminal mind that I was thinking, oh, I want to go, rob the bank. This is my intent. Or if you shot somebody that you intended to shoot him, it was an accident.
Which would be manslaughter instead of.
Right. You get the idea. Yeah. So in this particular case, they were arguing about the mens rea. And so the judge was eliminating, the possibility. And one of the things they spent a lot of the time on that day was going over the list of things that were prohibited from being talked about.
Yeah, they said they couldn't be a political trial. How are they going to say that if the prosecution is bringing pictures of them, showing them with political messages? The prosecution did a pretty sloppy job, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, it was really weird. It was a double stand. The government was saying, like, we want to show pictures of the embassy with the protest signs, you know, no coup and so on. But we don't want anyone to be able to say anything about a coup or about the government or anything like that. And so the defense just latched onto that and said, well, you know, it doesn't make any sense. You guys are allowed to say blah, 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 but we can't say anything. And so the judge actually
the trial of the century. This should have been like O.J. Simpson. It was such an important moment in law, and barely anybody knew about it. Barely anybody was in the courtroom. But,
and then the government said, we want to prohibit any jurors who've ever been to any protests. And the judge laughed at them about that.
Yeah,
and
she said, that's all of us in D.C. who lives in D.C. hasn't been under protest. And guess what? There were jurors, and we're hearing directly from the defendants on this. There were jurors that when they said, what is your profession? I work for the Central Intelligence Agency. I work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They were bringing intelligence agents as courtroom jurors, and they stayed courtroom jurors. But as David alluded to earlier, with all of that, 2 jurors out of 12 stood out. And they said, no, this is not right. We're confused. There's a whole bunch of evidence they're not letting us see. You're trying to railroad these poor people. 2 dissenting jurors held out. It was a victory. It was declared a mistrial. But now in June, they're going to try to go after them again.
And if either of you or anyone in the audience hasn't seen the movie 12 Angry Men, it's a must-see because it really shows you what happens when one person says, you know, everyone's like, oh, they're guilty, and one person says no. Henry Fonda stands up and says, no, let's look at the evidence, and then he actually convinced them all to exonerate. But
I think there's a movie called Hung Jury that's also very good. But yeah, one person can make a difference. Like I mentioned earlier, being at the right place at the right time. One conscientious juror, one conscientious citizen, it can make the difference. The story is really inspiring. And let me tell you.
You know, we should interview those jurors if we can find them.
I'm not opposed to that idea. We're actually bringing this up for the first time on your show, Jody. You should feel honored. But there's so many cases like that of injustices. And sometimes Hollywood gets it right. You know, their motivation being more profit than justice. But a lot of times they portray actually what happened. And this is not a Hollywood film. It's a low budget film, but we need people's support. And something I was trying to allude to earlier. I'm starting to get tired, right? When I lost my train of thought, it was the level of intimidation. I'm talking recent. I'm talking post the protection of the embassy, not the occupation, the protection. Occupation is something else. But post protection, there have been maneuvers and tactics from the state against filmmakers and activists that I can speak on with authority, and so can David. And let me tell you, in October last year, and this is going to come out in the film, in October last year, a SWAT team was ordered to converge on the home of a respected journalist who was involved at the embassy, Max Blumenthal. And on the order of the SWAT team, it said, this subject is armed and dangerous. Do you know what that means, Jody? That means very easily they could have killed him. They knew he didn't have any weapons. This was an intimidation tactic, and eventually they dropped the case. But let me tell you, right around that time, I used to live in South Florida, okay? And there are millions of Venezuelans, several of them were in D.C., that live in the same community as me or near where I lived, okay? And so in October last year, right around the same time they went after Max, they went after me, and I'll tell you how. I used to live in Boca Raton. And if you know Boca Raton, that's an hour north of Miami. Miami's where most of the Venezuelans in the entire U.S. are, okay? And let me tell you that my roommate showed me when I got home the business card of a detective. We're not naming names right now, but we will in the film. And this detective, when I looked them up on Google, they were involved in a shooting. Now, I'm not saying this is a conspiracy theory that they were sending him to do anything to me. I'm just stating the facts. I had no legal problems whatsoever in Miami. Anybody can look that up. I had no legal problems whatsoever. My lawyer emailed the detective. The detective never responded back. what's going on here? So there is intimidation tactics, and trust me, it's more than just Max, it's more than just me. They want to silence us. They don't want us having films coming out. And now is the time for unity, including during this virus, for all the journalists that were involved to work together, because the American public and the world deserve to know the truth.
Absolutely right. Are you nervous about it at all, about, doing this, considering that there has been these kind of intimidation things? So I guess, are you
Well,
intimidated?
he's been an activist for 20 years. I've been an activist for 19 years. So we're pretty seasoned, right, David?
Yeah, no, I'm not worried at all. I'm not worried at all. But if they do it, then I just deal with things as they come. If there's a threat. There's somebody on Wikipedia who's had people coming to her house because she challenged the right wingers. She's like in the Wikipedia Supreme Court, and somebody came to her house, and she's young too. I think she's like in her early 20s. I think it's just outrageous.
Now, Alina Duarte is a Mexican journalist who had Venezuelans trash her home, and the cops did nothing about it. This is post-protection. They went to her home in D.C., and the cops did nothing about it. This is what they do. They either use the exiles themselves or they use law enforcement to try to intimidate journalists, including the respected Mexican journalist who we extensively interviewed for this film, Alina Duarte, who was present at the embassy.
Is there anything else that we want to discuss tonight? Is there anything else that you feel like we might have missed out?
Just go to the website. It's www.embassyprotectors.org. And then right on the front page, it says fundraiser. You just click on that link. It has both trailers.
Hyperlinked under our intro, yeah.
Right.
So we need this help because we raised about $500 on GoFundMe. But again, this is a low budget film. We need everybody's help. We understand that it would be small donations because we're in a virus right now. But this will help to go towards the editors who are going to finalize the film, towards our next trip when the virus dissipates, to go interview Kevin and others. So we really need your help, and get the word out. If you can't donate, share our website, share our social media. Embassy Protectors 2020. We're on Twitter, Embassy Protectors 2020 Media Group, Facebook. You can look these things up. We're associated with Steve Grumbine. If you're already on his social media, you can find us looking up our names on Facebook, Twitter, etc. So yeah, it's important to get the word out.
Thank you both so much for coming and talking to me. And I hope you come back and let us know what's going on as things progress, right?
Yeah, we're happy to.
And I just want to end by saying that we hope in June that our four comrades, as they call them, the final four, the four embassy protectors, that they don't retry them, that some agreement is reached, because this is just exhausting, And if they don't retry them, that's also a victory, just like the mistrial. So let's see, because like we said earlier, it could take one or two individuals being at the right place at the right time to change history.
Absolutely. And that is a beautiful thing to end on. Thank you, Al. This is Jody with Real Progress in Action. Don't forget to like and share this video.